Everyone believes swords are meant to cut. Popular history tells you that the deadliest blade is the sharpest one, wide and gleaming, cleaving through enemies with sweeping arcs. Movies reinforce it. Games reward it. Art freezes the sword at the moment of a heroic slash, edge biting deep, armor parting like cloth. It feels obvious. Steel is sharp. Flesh is soft. Therefore, the better the edge, the deadlier the sword. Think about how intuitive that seems. You imagine combat as a series of clean strikes, each blow ending the fight. You imagine armor as something to be sliced through, not worked around. You imagine sword design as a fashion choice, wide blades for one era, narrow blades for another. But medieval combat didn't work that way. Picture yourself on a medieval battlefield. You are not fresh. You are not calm. You are wearing layers, linen, wool, padding, over which sits mail or plate. Your arms are heavy. Your grip is tight. Sweat runs into your eyes as men press in close. Your sword weighs just over a kilogram. It is not a cleaver. It is a compromise of mass, balance, and stiffness. Steel can only do so much. Make a blade thin enough to cut effortlessly, and it bends or chips. Make it thick enough to stay rigid, and it loses slicing ability. Now add armor to the equation. Mail does not present a flat surface. It flexes. Plate does not yield at all. It curves. It deflects. A cutting-edge meeting hardened steel does not bite, it skids. This is the problem medieval swordsmiths faced. Not how to make swords look impressive, but how to make them function against what men actually wore. Because on the battlefield, failure is immediate. A sword that cannot threaten armor forces you into grappling range. A blade that bends on impact leaves you defenseless. Design mistakes are fatal. This is where the real conflict begins. Look closely at a sword. Not its decoration. Its geometry. The edge is only one part of the equation. The spine, the thickness of the blade, determines stiffness. The distal taper, how the blade narrows from hilt to tip, controls how force is distributed along its length. Early cutting-focused swords are broad. Their edges are thin. Their tips are rounded. They excel against unarmored or lightly protected targets. When the edge lands on flesh, momentum carries the cut through. Bone fractures. Muscle parts. But now put mail underneath padding. You strike. The edge meets interlinked rings backed by fabric. The rings deform. The padding compresses. The edge never reaches the body. The force spreads out. The cut fails. Because of this, you instinctively swing harder. But harder does not mean better. As force increases, flex increases. The blade bends slightly on impact. Energy is lost. The edge skates off curved armor. The sound you hear is not a slice. It is a dull scrape. This is where the myth collapses. Against armor, cutting power is not limited by sharpness. It is limited by physics. Now consider thrusting. A thrust concentrates force into a small area. The point does not need to sever material, it needs to find a weakness. A gap. A joint. A visor slit. The armpit. The inside of the elbow. But thrusting requires stiffness. If the blade flexes on impact, the point slides away. To prevent this, swordsmiths thicken the spine. They reduce edge width. They sharpen the tip to a reinforced geometry that resists bending. This is why later medieval swords become narrower, longer, and more rigid. Not because cutting was forgotten, but because thrusting solved the problem cutting could not. Think about what happens in close combat. You are chest to chest. There is no room to swing. Your sword is half-gripped, one hand on the blade for control. You are no longer cutting. You are driving the point forward with your body weight, aiming for anatomical gaps. You feel resistance. Steel presses against steel. Your arms strain. The blade vibrates. This is not cinematic. It is precise. controlled, brutal. And it works. Around the midpoint of this realization, remember this. If you find this kind of myth-free medieval history as fascinating as we do, consider subscribing. Arms and Impact exists to explain how weapons and armor really worked, not how movies portray them. Now let's return to the mechanics. Distal taper matters here. A blade that is thick near the hilt and gradually narrows toward the tip maintains stiffness while reducing weight. This allows control without sacrificing penetration. The sword becomes a lever, not a cleaver. Because of this, edge geometry changes. Edges become secondary. Points become primary. The sword is no longer designed to defeat armor by breaking it. It is designed to bypass armor entirely. What this forced fighters to do was rethink everything they thought a sword was for. Training shifts. Techniques evolve. Manuals emphasize thrusting, half-swording, grappling, and targeting joints. The blade becomes a tool of precision rather than brute force. Weapon design follows. Sword profiles change to support these methods. The real solution wasn't more force, it was smarter use of geometry. Stiffer blades. Acute points. Controlled balance. Unintended consequences follow. Swords become less effective against unarmored targets, but vastly more dangerous against armored ones. The battlefield becomes a place where knowledge matters more than strength. Fashion does not drive this change. Armor does. As plate coverage improves, swords adapt. When armor declines, cutting blades return. The pattern is consistent. Relentless. Mechanical. Return to the myth. The idea that swords were primarily cutting weapons persists because it is visually satisfying. Slashes are easy to understand. Thrusts are subtle. Armor mechanics are invisible. But the historical truth is clear. Sword design followed armor, not fashion. Every blade is a compromise between edge and point, between flexibility and stiffness, between cutting power and penetration. Understanding this matters because it strips away legend and replaces it with reality. It shows medieval fighters not as reckless brawlers, but as problem solvers constrained by physics and materials. This is the mission of Arms and Impact. If this changed how you see medieval weapons, hit like. Subscribe for more evidence-based history of arms, armor, and impact. Comment below, what weapon or myth should we break next? Because once you understand how these weapons actually worked, the myths can never cut as deep again.